What's up? You are now listening to Americanized, a storytelling podcast where you'll hear from eclectic first and second generation Americans share their stories and real life experiences as children of immigrants. Hey, this is Rosalind, your host, and in this episode, Julie and I continue our conversation from last week's episode. We have discussions surrounding her South Vietnamese identity, as well as her outlook on life as a proud multicultural refugee. Stay tuned. Okay, so we were talking about simplifying English because we use too many extra words and keeping it simple and direct. And I'm curious, what is your business? You say you have a business. What is your business and how do you use that in your business?
Yeah, so I have a business. It's called Curiosity Based. And we help people practice curiosity in the world, starting in the workplace, because that's where we spend most of our waking hours. And so the easiest way to understand it is we do workshops and retreat facilitations. And I have this book called 7 Forms of Respect. And the idea there is that we talk about respect as if we mean the same thing, as if it's fixed, as if it's universal. And yet respect is, in my research, dynamic, relative, subjective, and contradictory.
Oh, okay.
And it's contradictory because we as humans are contradictory. I mean, I don't always do what I say I'm going to do. I can tell you that. And so in this, I definitely think that growing up bicultural has influenced the book because at its core, we have to be adaptive and respect is relative. And I think people talk about it as if, I think especially now, as if there's just right or wrong.
Yes, yeah.
And because aside from living in Vietnam, I also lived in the UK and Germany, France, and all of those places, we just have different ideas of respect and even just generational, or even just, I'll give you an example. In Vietnamese culture with little kids, they're supposed to bow when they see an elder. They're just supposed to put your arms across your chest and bow and say, I'm greeting you, older uncle, younger uncle. And I found out that I had some friends Hanoian friends who have kids. And when they came here, so it's Vietnamese and Vietnamese-American friends, and their kids aren't bowing. And so me and my Vietnamese-American friends are like, what's up with your kids? Like, where's the bow? Right. But I guess that's more of a South Vietnamese, actually probably pre-75 practice.
Oh, wow.
And something not as practiced in modern Vietnam. And so even that, right? I mean, we have certain expectations of, well, I wouldn't expect that of an American kid.
Yeah.
But you're Vietnamese. Oh, but you're not Vietnamese that grew up with this particular practice of this particular generation. And then, it's not that you're being disrespectful. It's just we have different expectations. And having to kind of sit to pause and to ask, why am I not getting what I expect versus you're rude.
Yeah. The curiosity piece, it's all connected. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
And if something is outdated or like you said, it's a generational thing, we can't expect the new generation to
things change all the time. Things change all the time. And it's actually really interesting. My experience is very much rooted in a particular time and region as well. And I talk about I now more and more, I actually talk about being South Vietnamese, not just about being Vietnamese, but being South Vietnamese, because that was a country. Before 1975, Republic of Vietnam was South Vietnam was its own country. And I compare actually Vietnam I look at Korea. There's North Korea and South Korea. And imagine if North Korea won and it was all one communist Korea, and how we probably wouldn't have K-pop, right? We wouldn't have all these, we wouldn't have all these a proliferation of Korean beauty products and all of these things that are coming out of Korea. And so I try to help people understand, well, that's what could have happened with Vietnam. But instead, Vietnam, it became united under a communist government. And so for a lot of South Vietnamese, we still think of, well, our homeland is South Vietnam. And so there's actually a different flag. So there's in cities with really big South Vietnamese refugee communities, we have a flag that's yellow with three red stripes, and that's the flag of the Republic of Vietnam, and that's what's considered the Vietnamese heritage flag, and that's different from the Vietnamese communist flag. So,
Hmm.
and then there's some like Seattle actually honors that flag. It
Oh,
recognizes there's a Vietnamese national flag, and then there is the flag that is the heritage flag of the Vietnamese community here.
oh wow, that's wonderful that they recognize it.
Mhm.
All these little things that I'm learning or that, they speak a lot to your culture. They're not little things.
But these little details and
Yeah.
just and I think a lot of people, I think that there's a lot of focus on the American dream,
Hmm.
and that's why there are all these Vietnamese here. And I think of migration having push and pull factors.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of focus on the pull factors of this American dream. We're such a wonderful country, and that's why people all want to come here. But there's not enough understanding around the push factors.
Hmm.
Why would someone leave their homeland?
Yeah.
Why would someone? Because my parents actually were upper middle class. They had a really great life. And there's actually a Somali British poet. I think the poem's called Home, and she writes, "No one puts their child on water unless the water is safer than the land."
Mm.
And to me, I mean that talk about that doesn't matter what your ethnicity or that experience, the experience of fleeing, of being
Hmm.
a refugee, of being a political refugee, and I think that's something that gets lost in a lot of the talking about the Vietnamese community in the US because there's so much focus on, oh, well, it's economic mobility, but that doesn't recognize what people were leaving behind.
Exactly. Like
Mhm.
that is the question. Why did you come to America? What were you
Mhm.
leaving behind?
Mhm.
Yeah, what was so bad that you had to come here? Like, why
Mhm.
are you chasing this American dream?
Mhm. I mean, my parents, for a long time, our newspaper was firewalled. You couldn't access
Mm.
it for in Vietnam. It was blocked.
Wow.
And my parents never went back to Vietnam. They were just, I think it was just too heartbroken, the idea of the country that they left. And when I first lived there, I was like, oh, it's so different. And I could see how it would be really sad to actually come back and see how actually the country is really thriving. Because
Mm.
sometimes, you want, well, I left behind and they're not doing well, right? But actually,
Yeah.
Vietnam's doing really well now. So it's thriving economically.
You said something interesting that I want to go back to, food,
Mhm,
that you didn't eat a lot of Vietnamese food growing up.
mhm.
What did you eat instead, and what was it like navigating the Vietnamese cuisine?
Yeah, so my parents were really busy, so I pretty much had three options. When I got home, I had Costco pizza, a spaghetti, or this Vietnamese caramelized pork dish with rice. So they were
Mm.
all in Tupperware, and it was just which one of the three would I eat? And because it was
Okay.
really easy,
Yeah.
it was easy, it was filling, and so I had very low variety, and I don't actually really value variety now in my diet.
Mm.
I really value convenience actually.
Yeah.
And it was easy uh and so going to Vietnam and experiencing what I realized is a lot of my Vietnamese friends food was a really important part of their culture and they had all this different exposure to different food and I just didn't have that. So they would throw out these Vietnamese dishes they just say them. I'm like, I don't know what that is, right?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. And so I didn't really have that exposure until living in Vietnam and then having more Vietnamese American friends. And still, even to this day, it's like, oh, that's a new dish for me.
Mm.
I now know how to cook quite a few Vietnamese dishes, and I learned that from YouTube. So,
Oh.
Vietnamese food is actually pretty labor intensive.
Yeah. Yes, I'm aware. In college, my roommate we did cook a lot of, or tried to cook, she did cook a lot of foods. And
Mhm.
yes,
There's a
hours.
lot of chopping. Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of fresh produce.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
A lot of prep work and then
Hmm.
just letting things stew and
Hmm.
marinate
Hmm.
for, yeah, similar
Yes.
to Ivorian cuisine too. It's gonna take a while. Start early
Yeah.
and then it's ready by dinner time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Recently I heard that I never tried Costco pizza, but I heard really good things about Costco pizza.
Well, and it was cheap and it was easy. So that
Yeah.
was, that's what my parents are for. I have two younger brothers, and so they just need to feed us so they could get back to work.
Hmm.
I think that, I mentioned just the South Vietnamese experience, and I think that that's something I didn't appreciate until college and understanding that a lot of movies about the Vietnam War in the US are about Vietnam and America,
Hmm.
but that the Vietnam is the de facto the North Vietnamese, the communists. And
Right.
that's I didn't realize until my research that, oh, the South Vietnamese are just seen as sidekicks to the Americans. And I think that a lot of Americans are very well meaning in that I've heard them say, oh, I'm so sorry what we did to your country. And I had to kind of remind them, you realize we were fighting on the same side and that you were actually supporting us
Hmm.
and you were our allies. So, what people don't realize is even with that guilt, that sense of, oh, we shouldn't have been there, that still centers the American story.
Yes, you're right. It does.
Right. It
Yeah.
doesn't, I mean, it doesn't allow for multiple perspectives. And so I'll just say April 30th in the US, that's the fall of Saigon.
Hmm.
And in Vietnam, it's called Liberation Day, the day the North liberated the South.
Hmm. Oh, a different
And
perspective completely.
yes, but the South Vietnamese community calls that the day we lost our country.
Wow.
So all three are true.
Yeah.
All three are true. And it just depends on your perspective. And so, I'm not saying South Vietnamese were right. I'm just saying that it was a we had our own country and people left for reasons, and it's not as simplified as in the movies, and I think that even now there's a lot of misunderstanding around it. And so, as a historian, I've often heard people say, what are the lessons learned from the Vietnam War, and let's not repeat that. And to me, I just, I don't like it when people say these lessons learned, and
Mm.
it's as if we can avoid making mistakes.
Right.
And as long as people have different ideas on what is good and bad and right and wrong, and honestly, a lot of times we don't know until years later, right? Because we believe what we
Exactly.
believe in the moment. So
Exactly. Yeah,
we
that's
only
right.
know what we know in the
Hmm.
moment. And so I feel that that's not the role of history. The role of history is not so that we can have these lessons to avoid mistakes. I think the role of history is so that we can honor different stories and experiences.
Absolutely. That's true. There's always like, yeah, don't let history repeat itself. You're right.
Yeah, and yet it will. I mean, all the narratives of the world, right?
Hmm.
There's we that that's it, uh it's just our mistakes will maybe be a little different. The context will be a bit different, and we'll have different challenges,
Hmm.
right? But the basic storyline of we fight for things because we believe that that's what we should be fighting for, and then we sometimes change our minds later on when we have more information. I think that this is universal. I don't think this is just the Vietnamese experience. I think this is true for all communities, that there's just a lot more complexity,
Hmm.
and not to think of it as a mono. I mean, even as I was saying earlier, some Vietnamese Americans had this, their parents said they didn't want to talk about being refugees. And I had a very different experience, and both are true.
Yeah, you're right. You have to honor both
Mhm.
sides. You mentioned other Vietnamese in your community didn't identify as refugees. Did you
Mhm.
go to school with other refugees that were maybe not as proud to be a refugee?
Yeah, I mean, I did have some, and or they might emphasize other parts. Like, oh, well, we came from this class, or it's just all right. Well, I feel lucky that I got to feel pride.
Hmm.
So it's just, and again, like, so I can look at him like, oh, I get to feel pride, and I guess that's not what you were instilled with, because it actually really changes, I think, my outlook on the world, because I just believed anything was possible.
I love that a lot.
And
Yeah.
and so to have that positive reframe on being a refugee, I think really just made me approach life a lot more optimistically.
Yeah, and that was at a young age too, right?
Hmm.
You were told that you're refugees and, just have that mindset that that is something to
And
take pride in.
entrepreneurial. I mean, because my parents, I think of my parents as hustlers among hustlers. I mean, they serve small business owners. And
Mm,
so every day it was just this everyday courage of just going and opening the shop and just and doing it again and again and making ask. I mean, I still to this day I'm amazed my mom has her English is at times pretty limited, and yet she is relentless. She will get what she just keeps pushing in this in English.
yeah.
And she makes sure that she is heard and she gets what she wants. And she doesn't let that insecurity
Hmm.
around it block her.
I love that. That
Mm-hmm.
again, the resilience. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that speaks to a lot of immigrant experiences.
Mm-hmm.
You can't they can't afford to be like shut themselves down or not, go hard and push themselves. And depending on like how they frame it, they are in the land of opportunity. Take advantage of that, even if your English is limited or you have an
Mm-hmm.
accent or you're missing a few words.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Because how do we convey charisma and connection in another way? Doesn't have to exactly be through words.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And people just need to be more empathetic and
Mm-hmm.
provide more grace to our people.
Mm-hmm. And to ourselves. I think that's a lot
Hmm.
of it too. I think I hear a lot of people who are just, oh, my Vietnamese isn't good. I don't want to try, or it's just I'm embarrassed. It's just that's how we learn.
Exactly. That is exactly right.
Yes, oral history just I when I did my first interviews, they were all in English. So I didn't speak Vietnamese at the time. There were some Vietnamese words thrown in, but I mean that again, it's just sometimes we think, oh, I can't do it unless I do it this way, or if
Hmm.
I'm not fluent in this language, just start.
Yeah. And
Just
you learn along
start.
the way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I still share those stories. A couple of years ago, I was on a speakers bureau in Washington State where I got to share the stories of the South Vietnamese from my research 20 years before that.
Hmm.
And and there were direct quotes from the people who I interviewed, and they were in English. And that wasn't their native language, and yet it still conveyed a deep sense of feeling. So and I think that oral histories don't have to be something that are then used by other people. It could just be we could do this at home with our parents.
Yeah.
And oftentimes our parents, but I found that they're not going to volunteer unless we ask.
Right. To share their
Yeah.
stories.
So sometimes
Yeah.
I mean, because I think in the American context, it's like, well, people will share what they want to share. It's just like, but another way to look at that is, well, maybe I don't know if you're interested or not. So I'll wait till for you to ask me.
Hmm.
Mhm. We need time before we're willing to answer too. Mhm.
Exactly. I guess there's two sides. We are either super guarded as
Mhm.
Americans, we don't share anything with anybody,
Mhm.
or then there's other people who are just gonna share everything with
Yeah.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a really good book called The Best We Could Do.
Mm,
And it's an illustrated memoir by T. Boy. And I just and the idea is that our parents are just doing the best we could do.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and there's this one scene in there that I love, and she's talking to her father. And in the first frame, it's her father and her as adults. And then the second frame, she's a little girl and he's a little boy. And we're just our inner childs are just talking to each other, and we're all kind of just traumatized and hurt. And that's who's really talking to each other, even though we have these our outsides, our adult bodies.
That's absolutely right. And that's something that I've been realizing recently, just having different confrontations with other people. I was told one time to picture them as a child, because that's
Mhm.
essentially
Mhm.
who they are at the
Mhm.
core. We are all children in adult bodies, just doing the best we can
Mhm.
with what we have and
Mhm.
our, like you said, our traumatized selves, whatever that looks like
Mhm.
for us.
And the author in that, she talks about how she tried to interview her mom, but her mom wouldn't answer. And so what she did was her mom would talk to her husband, and then in the back she would take notes. So sometimes it's like sharing it with someone, but her mom knew she was listening.
Yeah, but it's not
Right.
direct. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't direct. And so sometimes it could be, oh, well, tell it to someone else. So I mean, there are different ways of getting at these stories. And I think that we're really in a really beautiful time where there are a lot more stories being told by different voices. It's so exciting.
Very beautiful.
Mhm.
And for this, the oral history piece, that was part of your research.
That was part of my
Correct.
research for my undergraduate thesis.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a book called Their War that's based on those oral histories. My really good friend Susan Liu, she just wrote a memoir called The Manicurist's Daughter. And so she's Vietnamese-American. Her parents owned a nail salon.
Mm-hmm.
And even in that, I mean, I think a lot of people think, oh, nail salons, they're work that people have to do. And what they don't see is
Right.
no, there's actually a lot of economic empowerment in them. They're entrepreneurs. They shape their own destiny. And it's on you if you think that work is whatever low class or something, but that's how do we see that work? And so it's again, they're just different ways of looking at any given thing.
Absolutely. I don't know. I think that just rings a bell. It sounds very familiar. The manicurist
Yeah, it
daughter.
just came out a few months ago, and it's a really beautiful book. I highly recommend it. And I also recommend actually this documentary called Nailed It, which is about the rise of the Vietnamese. Vietnamese essentially created the nail manicure pedicure industry as we know it in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Right.
and how it's a source of economic empowerment, generational wealth,
Mm-hmm.
and it spread globally. And it
Yeah.
was through these 10 women at a resettlement camp in California who learned how to do this and then taught so many other people. And in particular, what I really appreciated about it was they also interview male manicurists. And I always
Mm-hmm.
thought growing up, even from that they felt emasculated. And what I learned was no, a lot of male manicurists are super proud of what they do. They're
Yeah.
artists. They have
Yeah.
relationships with their clients. And so it was lovely for me to watch a documentary that surprised me as well. And I love that it was a really positive take on this industry.
Yeah. I'll definitely be looking for that. Just the origin story sounds really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that service itself, I always say that I really respect it because you're touching feet and hands and
Mm-hmm.
it's like you said, it is an art form and I've had a male manicurist before and he was, it's not anything embarrassing. He's like
Mm-hmm.
super professional into the work,
Mm-hmm.
very particular and meticulous
Mm-hmm.
with everything. And I was like, I just love the environment and I always love to leave a big tip because I'm like, it's an intimate time with
Mm-hmm.
people, but in my experience, I feel like it's a prideful thing. Like you said, it's generational wealth.
They've democratized a luxury for so many people
Yeah.
because it used to be only movie stars could afford that. And they made it accessible to the masses. So,
Yeah. Everyone has exposure to it.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to look for that documentary. It sounds
Mm-hmm.
really, really good to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed talking with you, Julie. I love hearing your story and different stories and different things that you have experienced. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. I really enjoyed our conversation and what you're doing to share these stories of immigrant and refugees in the US.
Thank you. I am trying my best.
Mm-hmm.
I like to end my episode asking you, what is your one message to the listeners if there's any big takeaway that they should have?
That multiple truths can coexist and to practice curiosity around those when we're feeling disagreement or just, oh, that can't be true. It's just, well, maybe it's true to that person. And to try to learn that rather than asserting your own truth.
I like that. Keeping that mind open, and that will serve to people being more empathetic toward each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to catch you in the next episode where you will hear from Michael, who has a lot to share and you do not want to miss it. All original music produced by Stubborn Saul. You can find him on all music listening platforms at STBRNSAL.